There is a word, just one, and when it's used in the right way, it can transform your physical reality in a matter of seconds. It's not about magic or that kind of superficial optimism that promises to change your life just by smiling. We're talking about a principle where neuroscience and quantum physics seem to meet. And what you're going to discover today could explain why some people achieve recoveries that defy all logic, why certain shamans that Jacobo Grinberg studied seem to alter the perception of those around them, and above all, why you right now are shaping your experience without realizing it. By the end of this story, you'll pronounce that word correctly, because the vast majority know it, but almost no one knows how to use it, and that's why they never get results. Before we get there, you need to know a story that almost made Jacobo Grinberg doubt everything he thought he knew. If you stay until the end, you'll discover 4 things. First, you'll understand the exact mechanism by which consciousness influences matter. Not as an abstract theory full of fancy words, but as a process that he documented during years of research. Second, you'll learn what that word is that's capable of activating that mechanism, and even more importantly, how to use it so that it really has an effect. Third, you'll see experiments conducted with ordinary people who applied this principle and managed to change situations that seemed completely complex. And fourth, you'll do an exercise that, if you do it with absolute honesty, could start to change your own reality starting today. This isn't to take this on faith. You're being offered understanding. And understanding something, even if it seems less exciting, is usually much more powerful than simply believing it. However, it's curious. Thousands of people will watch this video until the end, but very few will actually be here. Most people will keep thinking about work, their problems, their phone, or anything else while listening to these words. Don't be one of them. Do something different. Straighten your back, take a deep breath, and focus all your attention on what's coming next. Because according to Jacobo Grinberg, that simple act already changes the state from which you perceive reality. And to seal that commitment to yourself, write in the comments, "My attention creates my reality." It's not just a comment. It's a statement of intent before discovering the word that, according to Jacobo, almost everyone knows, but almost no one knows how to use. In 1977, while working in his laboratory at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, Jacobo Grinberg placed electrodes on the head of a woman known as Pachita. She was a very famous shaman in Mexico City, known for performing healings that conventional medicine considered impossible. Skeptics claimed that it was all a fraud. Believers insisted that they were miracles. But for Jacobo, none of those answers were enough. He wanted to understand what was really happening inside his brain when he entered those states of consciousness. What he found that night never stopped haunting him. Every time Pachita began what she called her spiritual work, her brainwaves showed a pattern completely out of the ordinary. It wasn't just that she reached a deep state of meditation. He had already observed that many times. The extraordinary part was something else. Both cerebral hemispheres were functioning with almost perfect synchronization, a coherence so precise that, from a statistical point of view, it seemed practically impossible. And that's where the real mystery emerged. People who stayed near her, even without any physical contact, began to show surprisingly similar brain patterns. As if there were an invisible field, a kind of silent resonance that connected one consciousness to another. But almost no one knows what happened afterward. Jacobo spent 3 whole nights without sleep, going over the records again and again. What he had in front of him defied everything he had been taught about how the brain works. He called several colleagues. He showed them the results. Most of them responded exactly the same way. There must be a fault in the equipment. Some stopped talking to him. One even advised him to destroy all the information before ruining his career. Jacobo Grinberg. Yes, that classic scientific solution. If it doesn't fit, better make the problem disappear. But he couldn't pretend that it had never happened. So he made a decision that would forever change the course of his research. He began to study more shamans, more healers, and more people who, according to many, were capable of doing impossible things using only their minds. And time and again, exactly the same pattern appeared. An extraordinary level of brain coherence, a perfect synchronization between the hemispheres, and a strange ability to influence the electromagnetic field of those around him. If you've ever felt that reality is much more complex than what you were taught in school, if you've ever had the intuition that your mind has abilities you still don't understand, then you're probably not imagining things. You're not wrong. You're not losing your mind. And of course, you're not the only one who's asked these questions. What you're about to hear brings together decades of research that very few were willing to take seriously because it challenged too many certainties. But before revealing that word, you need to understand why it works. Because a word, without understanding the mechanism behind it, is nothing more than a sound. And this is where all the pieces start to fit together. In quantum physics, there is a phenomenon known as the observer effect. Scientists discovered something puzzling. When a subatomic particle is observed, its behavior changes, not because someone touches it, not because someone pushes it, simply because observation modifies the system. What previously existed as a set of possibilities ends up adopting a concrete state. In other words, observation participates in the reality that ultimately manifests. Inspired by this kind of phenomena, Jacobo Grinberg developed a proposal known as the synergic theory. According to this idea, there is an information field that connects all consciousnesses, all minds, and all forms of life. He wasn't talking about magic. He proposed the existence of a field as real as the electromagnetic or gravitational fields, but it was related to consciousness. And the way any person interacts with that field depends on a mental faculty that they use every day, although they are almost never aware of it. That faculty has a name: attention. Yes, that's the word. But before you think it's something too simple, wait a moment. Because almost everyone thinks they know what it means to pay attention. And yet, almost no one has really learned how to use it. Looking at something isn't paying attention. Constantly thinking about something isn't either. That's just the surface. The attention that Jacobo Grinberg observed in those shamans, healers, and people capable of producing surprising changes in their reality was not the ordinary attention of someone who simply looks at something for a few seconds. It was something much deeper, a completely coherent state of consciousness, where all mental energy converges at a single point. No distractions, no internal noise. Without that endless dialogue that consumes most of our days and keeps us divided. And there was a discovery that could never be published in traditional scientific journals. Not because the data was insufficient, but because they were too unsettling. He organized an experiment with two groups of people. He asked the first group to do just one thing: to observe a plant for 20 minutes a day. No special techniques, just look at it. He taught something completely different to the second group. They weren't supposed to just observe it. They had to focus all their attention on it, feel its presence, perceive it as if there were a direct connection between them. Maintain steady attention, deep and fully conscious. 30 days later, they compared the results. The plants in the second group had grown about 40% more than those in the first group. The only difference had been the quality of attention they received. But what was truly unsettling appeared when reviewing the brain recordings. While performing the exercise, the people in the second group showed exactly the same pattern that Jacobo Grinberg had found years earlier in Pachita: an extraordinary level of brain coherence, an almost perfect synchronization between both hemispheres. And something else: the electromagnetic field generated by their hearts increased measurably. Their energy wasn't just changing internally. It seemed to extend outward, interacting with whatever they kept their consciousness focused on. It wasn't just a simple subjective feeling. It was a phenomenon that could be recorded. If this is correct, it means that conscious attention is not just a psychological process. It also produces measurable physical effects on the environment. Now it's worth pausing for a moment and asking an uncomfortable question. Think about your life, about what you want to achieve, about the problems on your mind today, about the goals you say you're pursuing. Where is your attention really most of the day? Not where you'd like it to be, not where you say it is. Where does your mental energy spend most of its time? This is where one of the most common mistakes occurs. Reality doesn't respond only to what you want, nor to the affirmations you repeat 5 minutes before bed, nor to an improvised visualization between 2 phone notifications. That usually serves more to ease your conscience than to change habits. What ends up shaping your experience is what receives your attention consistently, consciously or unconsciously. And that's where the problem lies. A lot of people claim they want a different life, but they spend most of the day feeding exactly what they want to escape from. In 1982, a businessman went to Jacobo Grinberg completely desperate. His business was on the verge of bankruptcy. He had tried positive affirmations, visualizations. He had sought help from different spiritual teachers. Nothing seemed to work. Then Jacobo Grinberg asked him a very simple question. When you wake up in the morning, what's the first thing on your mind? The man answered without hesitation. Debts. The employees I might have to lay off. The rent for the place. Everything that could go wrong. Jacobo asked a second question. How much time a day do you think about that? The businessman lowered his gaze. All day. And that's when the real problem appeared. All his attention. All his mental energy, all his conscious focus was directed toward the prospect of failure. And, according to the synergic theory, the information field responds precisely to what receives sustained attention. If you feed fear for hours, you'll get more reasons to be afraid. If you constantly feed the problem will continue to occupy the center of your reality. Jacobo Grinberg didn't ask her to ignore her difficulties. That would have been absurd. He suggested something much more practical. For 20 minutes every morning, he had to focus all his attention on the version of the business he wanted to build. Not as a fantasy, not as a mere wish, but as a possible reality on which he focused all his awareness. He had to see it, feel it, mentally inhabit it, and do it by reaching the same state of brain coherence he had observed in the shamans. A state where doubt, fear, and that inner voice that always finds an excuse to sabotage any change disappear. Just attention. Absolute attention. 3 months later, that man came back. His company was not only still open, he had doubled his income. The funny thing is that his external actions had barely changed. He kept working the same way. He kept making similar decisions. He kept facing the same challenges. The only thing that changed was where he focused his attention. He stopped investing all his energy in feeding the failure scenario, and he began to strengthen day after day the scenario he wanted to make real. According to Jacobo, the information field responded exactly to that new focus of consciousness. But there was still an even more puzzling discovery, and it had to do with time. During his research on time perception, he observed a very clear pattern. When a person lives with fragmented attention, jumping from one thought to another, from one worry to the next, doing several things at the same time, it feels as if time disappears. The days slip away, the weeks fly by. And before you know it, you feel like life went by too fast. However, when that same person enters a state of completely unified attention, something unexpected happens. Time seems to expand. A single minute acquires a surprising depth. An hour can feel as intense as an entire day. It doesn't mean the clock works differently. What changes is something much more important: the way you experience your own existence. There was a moment when Jacobo Grinberg was about to keep all his discoveries to himself forever, because what he found challenged everything that science accepted. He conducted an experiment with two people separated by hundreds of kilometers. There was no contact between them, no wires, no devices. Just one instruction: to direct completely coherent attention toward each other at the same time. While he was recording their brain activity, something unexpected happened. When one of them entered a certain brainwave pattern, the other began to show almost the same pattern almost instantly, as if there were an invisible connection that didn't depend on distance. If that was true, the conclusion was revolutionary. Every time you direct your attention towards someone, you establish a real connection within the same field of consciousness. From that perspective, the remote healings that Jacobo observed in some shamans no longer seemed like supernatural acts. He wasn't talking about magic, but about coherent attention acting upon a shared field. And if that principle could be applied to healing, it could also be applied to any human relationship. When you direct sincere and affectionate attention towards someone, that person might perceive it on a deep level. And the same thing happens with resentment, hatred, or envy. Attention is never neutral. It always leaves a mark. Think for a moment. Have you ever thought intensely about someone and that person called you shortly after? Or did you feel like someone was watching you even before you turned around? For Jacobo, those experiences weren't just coincidences, but small manifestations of the same phenomenon. But then the big question arises: if attention has so much power, why don't most people get the results they're looking for? Because almost everyone makes 3 mistakes, and most people aren't even aware of them. The first is fragmented attention. We live surrounded by stimuli that are constantly competing for our focus: social media, notifications, messages, and multitasking. The mind jumps from one thought to another without rest, and each jump scatters its energy. It's like the difference between a light bulb and a laser. The first one illuminates, the second one transforms. That's how different scattered attention is from fully coherent attention. The second mistake is unconscious attention. Most people don't decide where to put their attention, they simply follow it. If money worries you, you keep returning to that problem repeatedly. If a relationship ended badly, you relive the same story every week. And that's where the danger lies. Automatic attention also creates experience, often more strongly than voluntary attention, because it acts without resistance. That's why so many people feed exactly what they want to escape from. The third mistake is directing your attention out of fear. You can focus on abundance or on health, but if you do it with anxiety, doubt, or desperation, the message loses coherence. It's like accelerating and braking at the same time. Jacobo observed that in those cases the brainwaves were chaotic. But when attention arose from calmness and a deep certainty, coherence appeared. And over time, the results also began to change. Years later, during a research project with a shaman named Don Manuel in the Sierra de Puebla, Jacobo Grinberg experienced one of the most impactful moments of his life. Applying those deep attention techniques, he felt that he stopped being just a researcher, observing the world. It was as if consciousness itself was observing the experience of being Jacobo Grinberg. And from that state, he understood something impossible to forget. Every thought, every emotion, and every point he focused his attention on seemed to weave his reality moment by moment, as if reality were a huge tapestry, and attention the needle that weaves it. When he came out of that experience, he wrote down everything he could remember. He knew he had crossed a line. Many colleagues already thought he had strayed too far from science. Jacobo Grinberg, on the other hand, believed that he was simply exploring a territory that still had no explanation. That's why Jacobo Grinberg proposed a simple exercise: the 3-minute technique. Pick something specific you want to change. 3 times a day for exactly 3 minutes. Direct all your attention to that reality as if it already exists, not as a wish, but as an experience. Breathe slowly until you relax. Observe your thoughts without fighting against them. And then feel with your whole body that this is already part of your life. It's not enough to just imagine it. You have to feel it. Because according to Jacobo, when the mind and body enter into coherence, attention reaches its maximum power. Practice this exercise for 30 consecutive days and see what happens. Don't expect immediate miracles, but stay alert to opportunities, coincidences, and synchronicities that may start to appear. And remember something else. Attention also works the other way around. Every time you feed a problem with fear or frustration, you give it more energy. Attention does not distinguish between what you desire and what you reject. It only responds to where you decide to place it, day after day. If you focus on conflict, you will have more conflict. So, what do you do with problems? Ignore them? No. You acknowledge them. You do what you can and move on. Because there's a huge difference between accepting that there's a problem and being obsessed with it. Acknowledgement allows you to act. Obsession only drains your energy, and most people spend the day feeding exactly what they want to escape from. Jacobo Grinberg told the story of a woman with cancer who was given only a few months to live by the doctors. She didn't go looking for a miracle, but rather trying to understand what she could do with her consciousness in the face of that situation. Jacobo Grinberg told her she had a choice. She could put all her attention on the tumor, on the fear, and on the countdown. Or she could direct it toward the life she still had, toward her health, and toward the possibility of healing, while continuing with her medical treatment. That's exactly what she did. Every time her mind went back to fear, she turned it back toward health. Over and over again, without giving up. Months later, she was still alive. Later, tests showed that the tumor had disappeared. The doctors called it spontaneous remission. Jacobo interpreted it differently. He believed that when he stopped feeding the illness with his attention and began to strengthen his health, his body responded to that new direction of consciousness. He didn't say that attention replaced medicine, but that it could become a decisive factor in the process. And that's when he came to the most important question of all. If your attention builds your experience, who are you really? Are you your body? No, it changes constantly. Are you your thoughts? Not those either. They appear and disappear. Your emotions? They are also fleeting. The only thing that remains is that which observes everything else. Consciousness, attention. For Jacobo, that was what you really are. Not the content of the mind, but the one who contemplates it.